Hi there, dear friends. Kalidas here to share some astrological information with you. Today I'm going to go into one of my favorite charts for right now on the planet, and that is the chart of the United States of America. And yes, I have gone into it in other presentations, but I'm going to point out some things about it today that I think will be valuable. Some key chart points as if it were being read for a human who had this chart. Last week I spoke about how the Mercury in the United States chart, I just used the word, it's got a really messed up Mercury, and I need to elaborate on that. Mercury is a planet of intelligence, of the intellect, and of communication. It represents the throat chakra. And in the United States chart, Mercury is in Cancer, a water sign, which has to do with emotions. It has to do with the conjugal connections we have with our dear friends, as well as it has to do with our, our domestic life. So Mercury is retrograde in Cancer in the 8th house of the United States chart, and it's conjunct this energy we call Rahu. So retrograde Mercury conjunct Rahu in Cancer in the 8th house, which is a house of suffering, a house of dusthana, or deep transformation. Not everyone gets the transformation of the 8th house. Some people just get the suffering. It has to do with how much you invite and embrace the transformation that life is calling you to through your life scenario. And that time will come for the United States very soon. In every chart, there's a timeline. And that timeline has to do with where the moon was when you were born. And it sets you on this karmic timeline that dominates your life, basically. And the United States currently is in a Rahu Dasha, which is the Dasha it was born into. So it symbolizes a rebirth for the United States to go through its Rahu Dasha. And this happens every 120 years. I mentioned it in the last class. But it began for the United States in January of 2013, and Rahu is generally an 18-year-long period, and it will go through various different planetary sub-dashas, which means that Rahu will get to have a go at each of the other planets in our chart. And what's happening for the United States very soon in December, we see December 30th, 2020, the United States enters into the Rahu-Mercury Dasha. And that is what's in the 8th house of transformation. And how does the 8th house work? It brings up something first that looks like death, that looks like destruction, or something we don't want. And then we begin to see we have no choice, usually, and we have to embrace that which life has sent us. And once we have embraced it, accepted it, received it, with trust in the gift that it actually is, then we get to feel the resulting transformation, and that is worth any effort. The spiritual transformation that we came to this earth to do, to go through, is worth any effort, because that effort that we make, it will be temporary, and the result, of course, will be eternal. Spiritual growth is eternal. So the Mercury and Rahu in the United States chart does not speak of very healthy communication. And if I were looking at this chart for somebody, a personal entity, I would say your communication problems are going to really come to the fore very soon. Through some type of scenario, your inability to communicate clearly because of stormy emotions. This would be the Cancerian energy with Rahu stirring it up, and then Mercury being the communicator of those stirred up emotions, and Mercury's retrograde, which means it's not that dialed in on clear forward moving communication. those things we will have a chance to grow from December 30th, 2020 all the way till July of 2023. The United States will go through its Rahu Mercury Dasha. And that is, if there's one place in the United States chart that needs a lot of work, that is that 8th house, our house of karmic debt. The house that we get given situations that we often don't want. And yet those situations are blessings in disguise. And if we embrace them with the right attitude, they will transform us into exactly who we want to be. And that goes nationwide. That can be true for the United States. And why, if Saturn goes over the moon every 20-something years in anyone's chart, why hasn't the United States changed a lot in its last Sade Sati, which was around the year 1992? And there's one really big difference from the previous Sade Satis, which were the year 1992, and then we go back to around 1964, and then we go back around to 1936, I think, if my math is right there. We're going back to the previous times when Saturn was in Capricorn, and that is the beginning of the United States big change, the Sade Sati. But now it's going through it again, and this time it's a way bigger transformation. And why is that? It's because of the Rahu Dasha. Previously, the United States, for the last 100 years, all of its Sade Sati periods, which is a 7.5-year long period in which Saturn cruises over the moon in your chart. The United States moon is in Aquarius, and the sign before it, during it, and after it are all included in Sade Sati. So if you have Aquarius moon like the United States, then the signs are Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And when Saturn goes through those three signs, that will be the Sade Sati. And so now United States is in that Rahu Dasha, which symbolizes a rebirth for the United States. So there's a double layer now, and it guarantees a gigantic amount of change in our country. And in the results, I'm sure the results will echo throughout the world. And again, the change I'm hoping to see is the East and West merging, balancing, the spiritual science of the East being more embraced by Western culture, and the Western efficiencies of the material life being more embraced by India. And it's happening. It's happening. We can all be confident and faithful that the Divine Mother knows how to do these transformations. It just takes these steps. Death, rebirth, and transformation. She must somehow destroy what doesn't work in order to rebuild what does. We could say it that way. So what are some elements of what Sade Sati might entail for the individual? Well, first, wherever your ascendant sign is, meaning what was rising in the east when you were born, that will make the Cancer sign a certain house. So for instance, if you're a Gemini ascendant, Cancer is your second house. And why do I say Cancer? It's because moon rules Cancer, and moon is what Sade Sati is about. So the moon is going to carry energy from Cancer, whatever house number that is in your chart. That's going to mean something. It's going to carry that energy to the house where the moon actually was when you were born. So we have two houses to work with to understand Sade Sati. So let's do it. Let's apply this to the United States chart. The moon for the United States, for Sagittarius ascendants, this goes for you if you're a Sag ascendant, the moon is the 8th lord. And that is the house of death, rebirth, and transformation. So Sade Sati for Sagittarians is hard. That's an 8th lord. The moon is the 8th lord. It's all about this death, rebirth, and transformation. And I do know some Sagittarians who've been through their Sade Sati, and it most certainly included a death, a rebirth, and a transformation. So In the United States chart, that's what we'll see. The moon rules the 8th house. The USA is a Sag ascendant. And where is that 8th lord? The 8th lord is the moon in the United States chart, and it's in the 3rd house of freedom, of individual free choice. This is a free country. We take pride in that. I think a lot of Americans like to assert, I have my rights. I have my freedoms. And there's a lot of people upset now about the mandates removing those freedoms, and it's totally appropriate. The United States will never be dominated by a communist law or by a ruthless dictator. Never. It was born with the moon in the 3rd house in Aquarius. This is the most free-thinking, forward-moving, do-it-yourself, start your own business, make your success happen with your will. That's the 3rd house. That's where the United States moon is, and that's what the country, kind of the spirit of the country is about that. But what about when we go through our 8th house karma, which is definitely being triggered now with Saturn on the moon? He's saying, where does this moon come from? It comes from the 8th house in this chart. So I have to transform. This is Saturn's voice. He's saying, I have to transform what the United States thinks of as freedom. And it has to do with a spiritual change, us realizing that the United States was founded as a country for God, under God, and to be guided by the divine. And if you were to experiment with your own life and just do whatever you wanted every day, you'd create a lot of bad karma. You'd treat a lot of people selfishly and probably destroy a lot of relationships. And that's kind of what the United States has done with this overly free, I'm going to do it my own way spirit. We need guidance. We're blind if we don't ask for help and guidance. So we have no freedom. This is what the masters assert. They say you think you have free will, but you don't have free will unless it's guided by wisdom. Otherwise, you're going to create bad karma. And that's going to be suffering. And that's not your desire. That's not fulfilling. So the United States has a 3rd house moon. It wants to do what it wants. It wants to do what brings bliss, but it's confused about how to go about that. And we're in the middle of a big transformation where I believe that the consciousness of this country will change in the sense of it will go through this death, rebirth, and transformative cycle, and it will have very much to do with what we see as freedom. What do we see as joy and fulfillment? Is it just sensory awareness? Is it just money and sex and drugs and wine? Or is it something more? Is there a success that we're meant to achieve here that's of a more inner type? One in which we overcome obstacles and boundaries within our own consciousness. The Bible tells us we're made in the image of God. God is a boundless power, a boundless consciousness. So that would mean that we too, in our truest nature, are boundless and are meant to actually remove all resistances, all boundaries, all things that stand between us and embracing the life that God gives to us. And remember, God is very organized. The universe itself is a miraculously balanced and powerful manifestation of consciousness, of organized consciousness, of planets revolving around space, of gravities working, of sunlight and moonlight balancing. And that very amazing organizational power goes right into your little life. It goes right into your little horoscope. That very organization is in your chart, and it's God's love for you. It's His wish to see you free. So reading a chart can give us that perspective, and indeed, that's what astrology should be used for. How can we understand better our life lesson plan? Where we're at in it, where we've been, that's valuable, but not the main focus, but it can be valuable for reflection purposes and not repeating the past. And then also where we're going. And the Rahu is what shows where we're going. The Ketu shows where we've been. And we're in the Rahu Dasha in America. Rahu's in the 8th house of transformation. But what comes first? Death and rebirth. And I think that we can probably all agree there's some of that going on. So the 8th Lord in the 3rd house is going to transform our idea of what freedom and free will is in the United States of America. It should be a glorious Sade Sati. What else do I have written about the chart here? Any points I thought might be helpful? So the moon rulership in your chart, that will be what your Sade Sati is about. For instance, if there's a Capricorn ascendant, and that would mean the moon rules the 7th house, and that would be about social action, sociality, people, marriage, deeper relationships, connections, social service. And so the Sade Sati might have something to do with understanding that better, or it could possibly transform a marriage. It could create the end of one and the beginning of another one. We never know what God has in store, but we can look at the energy in the chart and be aware of changes that are approaching. And we can adjust our actions and attitudes so that those changes can be ultimately to our benefit rather than to our detriment. If we don't have control over the reactive process, those unexpected, harsh changes we will respond badly to and create further bad karma. So we read a chart to prepare us for energetic shifts and to try to take the higher attitude and higher octave so those shifts can be ultimately positive for our spiritual growth and happiness level. The placement of the sun matters because the sun is your spiritual eye. It's your guidance from the divine. And if you have, let's look at the United States chart. We have the moon in the 3rd house. I talked about that. That's like our free will, our habits, our free choice, our sense of freedom. It's our choice of friendships too. It's a house of friendships. But in the United States chart, the sun is in the 7th house. And that's service to others. That's marriage and relationships. That's understanding social harmony. So what am I saying? That if we can prioritize those things, social harmony, respect for others, honoring our marriage vows even when there's disagreement, these are ways that the United States, and you're part of it if you're listening to this in the United States, these are ways that we could get through the Sade Sati with much more ease, is focusing on where is the sun in my chart. And here it's in serving others, harmonizing with others, respecting others, even though their views might be very different than our own. And I say that with emphasis because it seems like it's one of the main ways that we're screwing up. It's one of the main ways that I'm screwing up, and probably yourself. And so here we are wanting to change. We do want to see change externally, but how do we do that? We do it by changing ourselves. You change your magnetism, you change what you attract in your life. So focus on the sun in your chart. Get more sunlight energy. Meditate. Gaze in the spiritual eye. Ask for God to guide you. And admit how blind you are without that sun. Without that open chakra in the frontal cortex. We can't see a thing without God's grace. We can't breathe or digest food without that power. So remember where the sun is in your chart and try to find meaning between that and where the moon is and And especially when you go through Sade Sati, the sunlight will have some solutions for you. And in the United States chart, it's talking about social reformation, respect, as well as harmony, prioritizing social harmony. It could mean everything to our success, the degree that we tap that solar energy in our chart during the Sade Sati. People die during Sade Sati. People commit suicide. People quit their marriages. They leave spiritual communities. They leave the spiritual path because they're trying to do it with the moon alone. They think that they should know, with all their years of following the rules and attuning their consciousness, they should know the way forward. But even Jesus said, I don't know what my Father knows. He said, in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path. He said, unless you become like a little child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So arrogance, I think, in the United States chart certainly is something that needs to be purified out of our culture. We're very proud of what we've built. And there's a lot of embarrassing things that are going to come to the surface about our culture that will humble and help to reform it, most certainly. During the Rahu Dasha in the 8th house with that Mercury as our communicator, retrograde in Cancer, oh my goodness. There is more to this. There's more to this battle. And this Mercury-Rahu thing in the 8th house of the United States chart it's on its way to manifesting. December 30th, we'll get to see what it looks like for a couple of years. What does this portion of the Rahu Dasha, the rebirth of the United States, look like? It's probably going to reform our media, the way that we communicate, social media and otherwise. That would be Mercury. So are you tapping the sun's energy in your chart? This could make all the difference to your success in your Sade Sati cycle. It's a quest for your freedom and enlightenment, and you are the moon. So what is Saturn going to do when he goes over your moon? He's going to push on the shadows and make you aware of where you're not enlightened. And he's going to say, you know where to find it. It's in the sun. Remember, ask God to help you. You're not meant to know how to get through this challenge. God knows, and this challenge is here to help us deepen our attunement with him. For that's our only security. That's eternal. And whereas these external situations, whether we like or don't like them, they're all very temporary and fleeting. So it makes sense that we would make the acquaintance of that one eternal security in God's love, in love for God. And that includes his children, the people around us, loving them, even when they're stupid, even when they're selfish, because you can be stupid and selfish too, and so can I. So maybe we can grow together during this time and figure out, how can we become enlightened? It will be shown in your chart by the moon and sun placement, and when Saturn goes over your moon, he's going to really point out those areas where there's still shadow. It's a really great opportunity, this Sade Sati cycle. And it's quite significant at this time for the United States because it combines with this very important Rahu Dasha, which symbolizes the rebirth of the United States. So that's my piece today on the US chart. And there's a couple other things I'd like to say. One is planetary afflictions. Jupiter is alone in Sagittarius right now, very strong and gaining strength. So Jupiter is your second chakra, your creative attunement. Jupiter is positivity. Jupiter is everything that has to do with success and joy and faith. And when Jupiter enters into Capricorn, that will be, let's see, I had the dates. It was, Jupiter will enter back into Capricorn on November 14th. So that's about a month away. Jupiter will be heavily afflicted for about 4.5 months. What is a heavy affliction? What do you do when you're afflicted? What does affliction mean? If you're really, really irritated and afflicted by, let's say, a health issue, you probably won't find it very easy to be yourself. If you're really afflicted by an emotional relationship issue, let's say you found out that somebody betrayed you who you loved very much and trusted, and they betrayed your trust, you'll be afflicted by that situation. You will find it hard to be yourself. So there's a quality about affliction. You find it hard to act normal, to perform your normal function. And when Jupiter goes through Capricorn, he's afflicted. And when Saturn is there, it's double. So Jupiter's going to go into an affliction for 4.5 months. And this will symbolize the next battle for humanity, ending ultimately on March 30th, 2021, at which time I think there will be a lot to be revealed, a lot come to the surface, a lot clarified after that time period, because when Jupiter enters Aquarius, it's always very auspicious. And that is what will happen on March 30th of 2021. When is your Sade Sati? You personally will go through one. You might be in it. If your moon's in Aquarius, Capricorn, or Sagittarius, you are in one stage of Sade Sati. But you'll go through it eventually, and it would be helpful for you to know, what house does the moon rule in my chart? Because the Sade Sati will be about that house, as well as the house that the moon's actually in when Saturn goes over it. So when is yours? Let's look at your chart. I'd be happy to check that out for you. And if you don't have any money, please call me anyway. I love to serve in this way. Don't let money be the reason you don't get a reading. I'd be happy even just to tell you where the moon and sun placements are. If you feel guilty taking my time, I can just give you a few pieces of information. So the Sade Sati comes for everyone, and a little bit of astrology knowledge can be extremely beneficial during that time. So I would like to offer another thing, and that is astrology lessons. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about astrology, I work with several different people and teach them. Basically, I try to give them exactly what my teacher gave me, which is a very basic nudge towards the right sources and the right attitudes for the practice. And then we go through the planets, the signs, and the houses and their meanings. And it's all very illuminating. Some basic knowledge of astrology, even if you don't want to be an astrologer, can be extremely helpful. So if you'd like to take me up on some tutorial lessons just to see how they work for you, I do half price for that. So normally my sliding scale for readings is 80 to 120 for a session, no matter how long it lasts. But for a tutorial, it will be 40 to 60 for a session. And if you don't have any money and you're interested in my service, please call me anyway. You can pay me in 10 years. So I'm happy to offer this. I'm happy that you tuned in today and listened to what the United States chart has to say about itself. And God bless you. Thank you so much for your support and friendship. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.